Recording started.
Recording started, so behave.
Turn us off with the flickering still coming out. Yeah. Something else in there.
So what are we going to go over tonight, Andy?
Tonight is on the choice of poverty.
Okay.
Let's
Versus
see.
his early. So this is past his 23rd birthday.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. See what happens when I don't send out reminders, huh? Oh, we got Russell.
There we are, all the way from Bangladesh.
Oh, that's funny.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, brother. Yes, and I wake up in the right time.
You did, yeah. Good job.
Thank you, brother.
Well, I didn't see Pat or
Lorraine?
Lorraine at church at all Sunday,
No.
either
didn't
early or at the meeting. So
Right.
I hope they're okay.
Yeah.
They were there last Monday.
I haven't heard anything bad, so that's good.
It's 7 o'clock.
Well, I enjoyed my grandson's second birthday, so that was good.
Oh,
That was why we
Wow.
were gone last week. Yeah. He turned
Second.
2 on Super Bowl Sunday.
that's nice.
Oh yeah. You know how that is. You've got one that's older and younger.
Yeah. Is he your oldest?
Well, we have the 2 girls in college from David's marriage,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
but he's the only one from he's the only newborn.
Okay.
Look what St. Francis fans, even on our side. Yeah. Yep.
Well, you had a lot of people on last week. I'm sure they're going to show up. Some will.
Yeah, I think I definitely because my week I didn't really get another announcement out, so maybe that people are a little forgetful.
Well, I had to go to last Monday's email to get the you might want to send someone out right now just in case they can't find the
Yeah, I can do that.
Zoom link. I had to just scroll down to find what was that last email Andy sent me?
Yeah.
And then I said, I hope that link works for tonight too.
Who else came in? She knocked on some doors. That's right. She knocked on doors. Oh, you did? Yeah, okay. I don't know who came last week. I know Sharon did not want to come. She was coming down. She said no. She
Is
said,
that Mickey I hear in the background?
I'm trying to whisper.
Hi.
Hi.
It is President's weekend, so some people may be
Gone. Yeah. 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 We chose yesterday. We said, we're going to go up to that Mardi Gras because it's always been 3 days. We were going to do it today. And we were looking for the place where they change it. And I looked and I said, They only had it 2 days this year. We missed it.
Oh, is that right?
The one up in Palm Beach Gardens.
Oh, Artie Girl, they call it?
Yeah, they used to have it over at the oh, I'm trying to think of the name of that place up in Dickerson, by Dickerson Park up there, but
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Aventura.
Oh, that's nice.
They used to have it up there, Aventura, 3 days, just, how it is, arts and crafts and,
Well, I think we should start.
okay.
Maybe someone else will join us, or the rest of the folks will watch the video as they have been. So good evening and welcome to Jesus and St. Francis, or St. Francis and Jesus. Last week we looked at how St. Francis had kind of a unique experience of the Christian faith, in that he was able to see Christ in lepers, and then others as well. And so, we were off to a good start in that idea of him having a different set of eyes and an understanding of the world that had been lost in many ways in the time frame of the church, where there really wasn't significant regard for the incarnation. The understanding of Jesus was of the great and glorious Christ. This idea that he walked amongst us and cared for the least had been sort of lost, which is, what you'd expect when most of the people that are studying scripture are either, priests and bishops with the resources, maybe scholars, maybe the monks, copying them, but certainly not the average person who, with simple reading of the scripture, would be, I think, able to understand of Jesus in a incarnational way, that is coming to earth and being one with us. But it took St. Francis to bring this kind of back to the fore. And so we start there with our first lesson. And before we go any further, let's do our prayer, St. Francis prayer. Hope you're taking some time to learn that prayer. I work on it every day. I've still got a ways to go. So, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Okay. All right. So we talked about why St. Francis was important for us to consider in what we often consider the Dark Ages, but he was quite a shining light, and his influence of his perspective on the Christian faith was much needed and has lasted for some time. I have had a little bit of time to look at his influences lately on people, and one of the people I found that was interesting was a guy named Shane Claiborne, who in the style of St. Francis looked around his community and saw the poverty in a urban kind of a, one of those towns that had factories, and the factories had shut down and left behind a lot of people who really didn't know where to go next. And so we know those are places all over the country. So although it wasn't Assisi, that kind of an environment, it was a similar place that needed to be rebuilt, as St. Francis was asked to do by Jesus, to rebuild the church. So Shane Claiborne and others started a group called The Simple Way, and they make their own clothes, they grow their own food, they do works in the community of rehabbing facilities, houses, giving people food, and generally attempting to make their community a more positive experience. So he's not a Franciscan, but he's definitely acting in that kind of way of St. Francis. So I think others are experimenting in that vein. Maybe not a large number of people,
Is that
but
like Amish? Is that similar to the Amish people then?
well, the Amish people certainly live simply, and there is for them maybe a different reason, which is that they don't want to progress in technology. They don't want to keep up with the life, the complications of life that come as you continue to move forward. So their movement started, just around the industrial age. And, as people were getting interested in all sorts of industrial, urban life, they wanted to stay in a kind of a time warp. So it wasn't really so much of for them giving up as them stopping. Does that make
Okay.
sense? They just stopped. So, for example, the zipper had not been invented, so they won't use zippers.
Huh.
They stopped at hook and eye. That's where they stopped. The clothing is what they wore when their leaders said, "We're stopping. This is what we're stopping here." Horse and buggy. No mechanized cars. They'd had to make some compromises. I don't know all of them, but similar to Jewish kosher rules that are harder, perhaps to meet in certain situations, I think the Amish have had to compromise on some things. Like I think they're willing to mail a letter, even though the letter might be sent by a truck or a plane, but they won't get on a truck or a plane. And so it is simpler life, but it's perhaps not so simple out of the same reasons as St. Francis. But
Okay.
it's part of their spirituality. It's a good question. Mennonites had tried to live in simple ways. That's been one of their highlights. And of course, people continue to choose to be Franciscan in either the way of, a man becoming part of the order, a woman becoming part of the Sisters of Clare order. And then there are those who choose to be in the third order and live lives with poverty in whatever way that they feel they're being called. So we'll talk a little bit about that. He had a idea of glory, wanted to really lift up the family name. They were a wealthy merchant family, but they had not very much status, and becoming a knight would have given them a lot of status. But he was captured. He had a long illness. He went through a very difficult kind of mental break. Even when he came home, he didn't seem quite satisfied anymore. He did try one more time to head off to glory as a crusader, but ended up turning around after the first day. hearing a voice to serve the master and not to serve the servant, and also to rebuild my house. So he took it quite literally and started working on San Damiano Church, actually begging for stones and trying to sell his father's goods to buy stones to rebuild the church and give to the poor. So there's the crusader off to glory, who ends up turning around with a whole new, as they say, knighthood, a whole new romantic ideal, which now is to serve Jesus in some remarkable way. They say that he really never changed his personality. He just changed his direction, and his personality of filled with joy and celebration and generosity just got turned around, instead of for glory for God, which is, I think, a good lesson, to take the talents we have and to use them in new ways. I know for me, I have always used my music in the faith setting. I could have been in a bar band or a wedding band or something like that. Every once in a while I think about that, but the fact of the matter is I use my musical passion for worship, and there's all sorts of ways. Daryl, you've used your organizing abilities for many years with Village of Hope. Just incredible gift and for many years there. But St. Francis chooses that life, or feels like he needs to turn around from the direction that seemed obvious to him to a new direction. So he hears the gospel say, "Sell everything and follow me." And he begins ministering to lepers. This is very significant because he detested lepers, and yet his heart was turned around to begin to love them. He ends up having followers, and the order develops. I won't go through those last things. So we talked about Jesus is the fullness of the incarnation of God. He starts to see that Jesus is present in the face of Christ, and he begins to serve lepers, but he also sees that amongst the poor. He has a encounter with creation where he sees sort of Christ and God present in creation. And this idea can be very, one has to be careful using this idea, because it's not to say that everyone is Christ. That would be a new age. Everybody is sort of a spirit or a God of their own. He's not saying that. He's saying that the relationship Jesus has to each person causes him to be in them, with them, and therefore to embrace Christ or to embrace a leper is to embrace the Christ who was with the leper. You can see this in the Bible text where we have Jesus saying, whoever gives a cup of water or food or clothing or visits in prison, they are doing it as to me. And they say, well, we didn't see you. For some, it's the excuse, we didn't see you or else we would have given you water. And others, it's like, well, we didn't know that was you, but we just gave you water. And Jesus said, I will judge those who treat others as they would treat me. And it's pretty evident that Jesus wanted us to see that element of him in each person. And if we love him, we of course would then love his people, his birds, his fish, his sun and his moon and his wind and his rain. So I asked you,
Kind of like, it's kind of like when you say at one of the benedictions that you see the face of Christ in others.
yep, and may everyone see the face of Christ in you.
Right.
So you've got the Christ to love, and then your face is the loving Christ. And certainly we are to be that. If there is going to be anyone convinced that faith is worth having, it's going to be because we convince them by our actions, not our words. I think it's very unlikely we're going to talk someone into Christianity.
Right.
They do need to have talking, and they do need to know the truth about Jesus, but they're gonna come to Christ because they feel loved, cared for, appreciated, accepted. So that's what this symbolizes. Hi, BB.
Good evening.
Yeah,
Hi, BB.
Sorry,
So-
I'm a little late, folks.
that's all right. So did anyone see the face of Christ in a unique situation this week?
Can't say I did. I'm thinking.
Well, it's not fair because you didn't get the assignment, really.
Oh,
It was in the talk. Russell, tell us about your nurses showing you the face of Christ. Russell was in the hospital this week.
oh.
Well, yeah, I was in hospital, yeah, in 2 weeks and 5 days there. And I had a tumor surgery, and there was many doctors and nurses. They always carrying me, and before take medicine, before take injection, and before do everything, I just pray to God in my own language, in Bangla. And the nurses and the doctor asked me who you are and why you are praying. And I did not hear like this prayer before in Bangla. And because in Bangladesh, it is the majority is Muslim, and that's why they used to pray time in Arabic language. When I speak in Bangla, they were shocked and surprised and amazing, and asked me some question about that. And the nurses, they were very happy. And the nurses also asked me to pray for her and their family, and I did. And this is how I shared the God's loves to the people and to the least. Yeah, so the God using us.
Yeah, it was
Yep.
really exciting. He said that the one day they brought him some food for breakfast, a few little things for breakfast, and then he prayed with them and they talked, and the next day he said they brought him a lot of food. So they were being Christ-like to you. Anyone else have a Christ sighting? So it's a thing to cultivate, to begin to look around you. The simplest view of that is whoever needs you. Whoever needs you, a friend, a person in need. Sometimes it's face to face. Sometimes we write a check and send it in the mail. Sometimes we watch the news and we pray for those people, knowing that they're Christ for us, the Christ that walks on wounded feet for us. So it's something that St. Francis began to see, and it certainly is not something that was understood to be at first to be very acceptable. Christ had to be all glorious and all powerful, and actually could not possibly be seen in a leper. That would just be horrifying to think of that. And yet that's what St. Francis brought to Christianity. And I think it stuck with the monastic orders, I think all of them were influenced by this idea, because so many of them have been involved in like care ministries. But I think that's the real reward factor. You know, if you're just helping people, you know, people can be ornery and grumpy and unthankful, and you can get tired of helping them. But if you're helping the Jesus that's with them, then there's no end to what you would give, because he's given you everything. So you stop looking at them as grumpy or unappreciative, and you start looking at them as Jesus. And you say, well, I think I can go the extra mile. I think I can, you know, keep on keeping on. Because after all, Jesus said, you know, there I was in need of water, and you didn't give me anything to drink, you know, or you did. So we talked about that and the ideas of knowing that Jesus had made his home amongst us, and that gave us a new view of who God is for us. He is with us. Now we're going to go on to number 2, which is the paradox of evangelical poverty. Paradox of evangelical poverty is kind of a big word for the understanding that Paul brings up, which is God's foolishness is actually wisdom. Our wisdom is actually foolishness. That's a paradox, that we think of wealth as success. We think of and yet it's poverty that is success. We think it's fame, but rather it's humility. It's a paradox. We think of power, and rather God is made known, magnified in our weakness. For when we are weak, he is strong. So this has good roots in Paul's theology, but it also has, you know, clearly initiated and illustrated by Jesus. Our author begins this chapter with the words, "We find God when we become poor enough for God to find us." What do you think that means? When we become poor enough for God to find us?
I would think when we come poor enough in spirit, when we're down on our luck, when we're at the end of our rope, kind of like from the Sermon on the Mount.
Exactly like the Sermon on the Mount. Exactly. Isn't the Sermon on the Mount begin with the Beatitudes, and aren't all of the Beatitudes paradoxes?
Yeah.
All of them. Every one of those is quite the opposite. What it sounds like is not what it ends up being, and that is really captures this essence, Daryl, the Sermon on the Mount. You know, blessed are the poor, you know, for they will inherit the earth. What? Those are exactly opposites, and yet the paradox is that's what Jesus promises. And the morning will, you know, receive blessing. All will receive blessing. So another way to look at this is that when we're full, do we have any need for God? When we're just filled up with life?
Hopefully, but it doesn't always happen.
Can you be too full to have any real room for God in your life? I think that can be possible, right?
Oh, it can be
Where
possible. There's certainly people like that.
we have, you know, one thing we can be full of is sort of baggage, guilt, shame, our sin. So one thing we do on Sunday at our 9 o'clock service is we empty ourselves, right? In confession, we empty ourselves out so that there will be room for God to pour himself into us. It is, you know, a moment where we say, we don't want this stuff anymore. We may have wanted it at one, but we don't want this. You know, we want to empty ourselves of that. The will, you know, Jesus says, you know, not my will, but your will be done. He had to empty himself. He had to give away his will, give away his own desires in order to be available. It's something that I think is pretty challenging about Francis, is that we tend to set the bar fairly low, you know, for ourselves. It would be something like, well, you know, get to church when I can, pray when I remember it, read the Bible, maybe, you know, stop by my neighbor to see how she's doing after her hospitalization. Well, if it all works out right, I'll do that. You know, send a donation to Ukraine. Well, you know, I don't know. You know, you can set the bar pretty low in your Christian walk, and you feel pretty good because you haven't killed anybody that day. You know,
You hope.
you know, you didn't commit adultery in real, maybe in your heart. You didn't really lie, or it wasn't a very big lie. We can let ourselves off pretty easily. Well, if we let ourselves off easily, then there's certainly not much need for God, you know, and we're in pretty good shape without God. What was it that convinced Francis that wouldn't work for him? What convinced him it wouldn't work?
Could it be bringing when he was in prison?
Mm-hmm. When he got out, he got all his wealth back, his home, you know, his status came back. But did he find value in it anymore?
Evidently not.
Right. Yeah, it became pretty apparent to him that it was sort of an empty existence to simply have things like that. So in that state where he's trying to figure out, I had a voice tell me to turn around, I'll find out what I'm supposed to do. I'm kind of disappointing my father significantly right now. I'm not really attending to business. I've been attracted for some reason to loving or caring about lepers. I'm rebuilding this local church, you know, to obey the command I heard to rebuild the church. But what's it all about? And he hears the gospel, a gospel that's read in a church service. He's going everywhere to take communion because he wants to have communion as every day, you know. And I was surprised to find out that that people weren't taking communion very often. Did I mention that last time? That
No.
they didn't take communion very often, and part of the idea was that they weren't worthy of taking communion. You know, so if they didn't go to confession, and then they weren't worthy of taking communion. So they also were supposed to fast, and you know that's kind of a drag, and not eat, you know, before the communion. And so people weren't taking communion often as we think of that now. But Francis is hungry for it because that's where Jesus is. He wants to be where Jesus is, in the bread and the wine. At a service, he hears from the gospel, go sell everything you have and give to the poor. What is this in response to? Is a question. What was the rich man's question to Jesus?
How do I enter the kingdom of heaven?
Yeah, so can you imagine Francis just sees himself really in the same shoes as that man, right? A wealthy young ruler comes to Jesus. So Francis hears like, a wealthy young ruler, well, I'm practically that person. And then he says, sell everything. Now, what was in the story, how does it turn out for the wealthy young ruler?
He gets scared and leaves.
Yeah, because he loved his things. He loved the things he had. Boy, we can relate to that. But with Francis, it's exactly the opposite response. He declares, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. This is freedom for me. this is joy and happiness for me, to let go of everything. And so he never does anything part way. He ends up renouncing his wealth, family, and his future. And in a dramatic moment, he ends up in the middle of the common square in Assisi. His father's furious, and the bishop has come to sort of, I guess, in an embarrassed way, he's got to deal with this guy who feels like he has a calling from God. So the bishop is ready to be by his side. And this is the great picture where Francis just takes off all his clothes and hands them. You can see the father holding those clothes. And he
And
says,
somebody's holding the blanket.
yeah, and the bishop quickly takes off a robe of his own, and he wraps it around Francis to make this a PG or even G experience. But the symbolic issue is that now the church is going to be his provider, and God is going to be his father. So he's made a change. And this is very public, and everyone thinks he's really crazy, or a few are intrigued and see the joy he has, because he doesn't do this out of sadness. This is out of joy. I would think that's probably something to take a lesson from, that begrudgingly giving things away or letting go is not exactly in this spirit.
No,
You,
there's an interesting quote I heard the other day. It was, unless and until we are certain that we have enough, nothing more can be added to it,
mm,
which is pretty deep.
yeah,
When-
yeah, I think you're on the same track as we were talking about there. Mhm.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think that, Daryl, you may have heard it when we've been in Haiti, but they talk about you never know how much you need God until God is all you have.
Right.
And we sometimes marvel at the faith of the Haitians because of their trials. And they basically would say to us, well, what choice do we have? Faith is our only choice. And you can envy that in a way. And maybe you do envy that. Maybe that is something tugging on your heart to let more go. Susan's been listening to Bono from the music group U2, his biography, and he was part of the conversation that took place with Warren Buffett, when Warren Buffett basically said, I'm going to give, most of my money to the Bill Gates Foundation. Remember when he did that?
Mm-hmm.
It was a huge amount of money. Now I wouldn't say he didn't give it all away, but it's interesting. From what I understand, Warren Buffett lives in the same house he's always lived in, some sort of a 2-bit ranch house, and doesn't really express his wealth in significant ways. I don't know how religious he is, but he was, among one of the richer men in the world, and obviously so was Bill Gates. So Bill Gates gave a big chunk of his money too, and that I guess that gave them an opportunity to do the right thing. It gave them the opportunity to worry less about their own money, because you can worry a lot about your money. So Francis, I don't know if any of them took a page from Francis, but it is inspirational, I think. And of course, the question is, is not this what Jesus did coming to earth, right?
Oh,
Did
yeah.
he not give up?
Yes.
And is there anything to say to indicate that he was comfortable, wealthy, powerful?
No.
Nothing about that.
No.
We forget that the the resurrection is such a powerful, glorious thing that we forget so much about. Really, most of his life was nothing like that.
Mhm.
And only at the very end, sort of like the movie where, 9/10 of it or 94% of it is bad for the hero, and there's only a couple minutes of like, success or glory. But for some reason with Jesus, we forget the rest of the movie. We just remember the good stuff, the resurrection. So if you wish to be perfect is another text that he heard. Go and sell all you own and give to the poor. He heard this text when a man named Bernard of Quintaville came to him and said, I'd like to do this with you. You're happy, you're joyful. I'm wealthy, I'm miserable. I want to know what how I can, be with you in this, I guess I'll say adventure, or in this penance. They would have called it a penance. And St. Francis said, well, let's go to the church and get them to open up the Gospels for us. Because, having your own Bible was a rare thing to have your own Bible.
Well, in fact, at that time of age, they didn't have one in a normal language. It was in Hebrew or Greek, right?
Mhm.
And they didn't want it. The Catholic Church didn't want it translated because they wanted to be the only one that could interpret it.
Yeah, there was certainly significant persecution of the early translators. Wycliffe gets killed, John Wycliffe, John Huss, those who tried to translate. Luther took it in. Luther was already, a wanted man when he started translating. I think he was resigned to the fact that probably would catch him and kill him, so he had nothing to lose.
Right.
But St. Francis would have known scripture because he would have gone to church and heard it, and listened to it and memorized it as it's being spoken. He goes
And
to church.
as you said, as one of those, not the commoners, but what you call them, a major. As a major, maybe he knew Greek.
He might have, and certainly there would be in the Catholic churches there would have been a Latin translation.
Okay, so he could know Latin.
They actually there was a time where the Latin translation was the dominant translation, and it wasn't until the Protestant Reformation that when people started translating that they insisted on going back to the Greek and Hebrew.
Okay,
because
so it was in Latin. Okay.
Latin, they were suspicious a little bit about the Latin translations, I think. Did the church influence these translations? So they went back to the original language. So they go into church and ask the priest to open the Bible. He opens the Bible, and then they do this thing. You can't believe that they do this. They put their finger on a page and read what's there on the page. And they do that 3 times and come up with 3 of the foundational verses. Well, you can believe that or not, but it would be difficult in the Gospels, at least in somewhere in vicinity of your finger, not to see Jesus addressing worldliness in some way, urging people to choose the kingdom of God. So maybe it is an absolute coincidence that the texts that he found were these ones. He could have found perhaps some others as well, but he says, well, you need to sell all you own, Bernard. And Bernard says, great idea. And he runs back home and he goes crazy getting rid of his stuff. And others came too. Some did ask if they could leave it to their parents. Could they leave their goods to their parents? And there wasn't a firm answer, but I think Francis' initial idea was are they poor? Or are you just going to leave behind wealth? Because if they're poor, then they're part of the people you need to give it to. But if you're just going to leave behind an estate for them, that doesn't fit what we're trying to do. Your entrance into this club, your dues are to give it to those most in need. So if your parents aren't most in need, then no. Interesting, huh? You think
Yeah,
about that.
I read all that stuff or listen to you saying I got it. I'm not a good Franciscan.
One of the things to think about, of course, if we're fortunate enough to leave anything behind once all of our expenses are added up, but to make sure that we keep in mind the opportunity we have to give to organizations that will continue to carry out work that is aimed toward the Christian faith. Certainly having some kind of amount for either the church or another charity. We already have that in our will. It's the first thing we have in our will, that gets taken off the top, and then the kids get to split the rest. I don't know how they feel about it, but I don't care.
But I mean I understand that and tithing and more than tithing and helping others, but this is like getting rid of your home and all your possessions and having nothing left for your future except begging to still exist as you help the poor.
Right.
I'm not that person. I'm sorry.
Well, we can't have a world where everyone does that. I mean, we can't have a world where everybody sells their home. So obviously the goal can't be that everybody does the same thing, but certainly there's a place for us to think about what does it mean to give up. We're getting close to Lent here, and we often trivialize giving up for Lent, chocolate or Pepsi. Or I gave up Coke one year, but I drank Diet Coke. What good does that do? But it is a thought, giving up some things. I know some people have said, well, I'm going to give up, smoking. I need to do that anyway. Some people want to watch their weight. That's great. But those are all things for us. What about giving up for others? Is this Lent the time to find a way to serve others directly, or to care for others directly, or benefit others directly? I think that'd be a very honored way to celebrate Lent, rather than simply, denying yourself chocolate until Easter morning. St. Clare ended up being one of the first women to take these words seriously after she saw the joy Francis experienced. And it must be known that by and large, the people who did this found a great amount of joy in it. Not everyone, though. And at the end of his life, Francis said, "No, I chose my way to empty myself. Now you have to choose your way. What does that look like to empty yourself for you?" And it could be for some people really just turn off the TV for a little while. It's on 24/7, and just turn it off and do something. It could be thinking through your charitable activity, church involvement, etc. And then the text, if you would follow me, deny yourself and pick up your cross and follow me. This is not the best billboard slogan, I mean, I think this is a rough one. You tell people who want to put down their cross, they're tired, they're burdened, they're suffering. Put down your cross. That sounds good. Or let me take your cross away from you. Oh, that sounds even better. You take my cross, please. But, Jesus says, pick up your cross. Again, this ends up being a good experience. I think, Daryl, you can attest that you don't regret anything that you suffered for your ministry with Haiti, and you could have had so much free time and
Yeah,
less.
you don't consider it suffering. Yep.
Yeah, and be with your clients. Being married to a therapist, I know, it's hard work. But to look back at it and say, but it was good work. So these texts become the core of the first rule. A rule is a manual for a order. And in order to be recognized by the Catholic Church, you had to get your rule approved by the Pope. So Francis actually goes straight away. He has got 11 guys, 11 or 12, and he goes straight away to Rome and asks the Pope. The Pope turns him down at first because he sees this smelly little Italian guy. He's like, what are you bothering me for? But he has a dream about the church falling over, the big church that was his main church. And he sees a little tiny, dirty looking Italian fellow walk up and put his shoulder to the church and keep it from falling over. So this is a dream that the Pope, as he realizes that the person doing that is St. Francis. So he goes back to St. Francis and said, I'm going to give you the approval for your rule. You can take people in, you can be their guide, and let me see how this turns out. Now, this was a Pope that was very powerful, so it was quite a turnabout for a Pope who was very powerful to grant this to almost his alter ego, St. Francis. Now, one bishop, the Bishop of Assisi, thought, after he looked at this rule, he says, I think your life is too hard and too rough. And it's kind of comic that they're telling St. Francis, that's too hard. People won't want to do it. Well, it's true that they wanted to soften his rule as years went by. And it's true today that very few follow St. Francis's original rule to the letter. Although periodically there'll be groups of people that say, we're going back to St. Francis, no more shoes, no more ownership, no more sleeping inside. And that'll go for a while. And then, I think it's hard to do that. St. Francis admits that doing it the way he did it, he probably hastened his own death with the life he lived, and maybe even came to regret that. So there's the Francis and the monks, to wannabe monks, giving the rule to the Pope and getting their blessing. Whoops. All right. So our reflections today, Philippians 2, Jesus being very nature God made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. How do you think people reacted to St. Francis's choice of poverty in his day? What would you expect they thought?
That he was nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, here he is, a major and a crusader that probably everyone envied for their particular wealth. And they couldn't believe someone like that would be giving it up, especially in those times. You're talking about 1200s, right? Early 1204, 1210, 1210, I mean, or something like that.
His friends were, startled. And I know there's one scene where he's begging food, and because he at that time he believed that begging was what he needed to do. So he needed to work on the church. So he had no time for another job. So he worked on rebuilding these couple churches, and then he went begging. Or when he traveled, he would go begging because he had no way to carry food for several days. He's going to beg with this group of people who are having like a party at an inn, and he realizes it's all his friends. And he turns around because he initially ashamed that there's all his friends, and here I am now, this beggar. But then he ends up turning around and going back to them and saying, you know, this is the life that I've chosen. You know, and surprisingly, people saw the freedom, the simplicity of it all. The Pope said, why would you want to give everything away? And St. Francis says, if I give it all away, I won't have to have any weapons to protect it. If you give it all away, you have nothing that can be stolen, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of the freedom you might have if you go out for a night on the town and you don't have to bring any money, keys, or wallet with you, right? You know, if something happens, you've got nothing, right? Although I would be nervous that someone would be mad that you had nothing, make it worse for you. Yeah, so they had some interesting reactions to that. They even thought it was strange because they were spending their lives trying to get out of poverty. And here he was trying to get into poverty. And you could say this is something that a wealthy, spoiled wealthy kid, you know, could do as a lark, as an adventure. He didn't really know hunger, but he didn't turn back. He chose hunger and poverty, and he stayed with it. Do you think this choice made it easier for him to relate to the poor?
Yes.
It certainly levels the playing field, doesn't it?
Yes.
For my seminary class on urban ministry, I had to do a project, and so I decided to stay overnight at a shelter downtown. And so I had to figure out how I might convince other people that I needed to be staying overnight in the shelter. So I remember I got my clothes kind of dirty, and I saw where people were, and I walked up and I started talking to them, and I had to make up a whole story about, you know, what was going on in my life. And I don't know if I was convincing or not. But one thing for sure is within a couple hours, people were talking to me. You know, they were talking to me, and one of them, when we went to sleep, told me that I needed to sleep, use my shoes for my pillows so no one would steal my shoes.
Mm.
So he wanted to clue me in. And then the next morning, one of them said, if you're looking to make a little money, you can come over here. Some of us do deliveries of newspapers for the newspaper, and they pay us. And sure enough, I ended up making money that day.
Ah,
So, but it was easier to talk to them when they thought I was in their shoes, so to speak. I felt kind of guilty because I was kind of lying. You know, so, but St. Francis didn't have to lie, you know, he was one of them. So the big question then, how does that make us think about our wealth, the stuff that we're full of? What kind of debates or discussions do we want to have to make room in our lives, on our hearts, on our agenda. You know, you look at each day, how full is it? And how do you look at it so as to be available for whatever God, you know, might have for us. I've always thought it'd be great if I would, you know, give myself time each day from going from one place to another in case I came across something. Have you ever been too busy to stop and help, or too busy to talk to someone? I find that happens to me all the time, where I'm so motivated to my next project that I'm not paying attention to somebody who's talking to me and would love another 10 minutes, you know, but I'm looking at my watch, looking at my phone and saying, oh, no, gotta go. How does this make you all think about it?
Well, certainly, I'm looking at both those questions that you have, those last two, and it's not like I'm not willing to give everything that I own up, but certainly I pray that the Lord can help me share my wealth in a meaningful way to help with the poor and to guide me in how to do that.
Right.
I mean, there is the tithing and give your first fruits, and there's those other redeeming qualities, hopefully, that we can also help do. That doesn't mean we have to sell our homes and live on the street.
Right. Again, if everybody sells their home to live on the street, that doesn't make much sense, does it? But you know, is your home used for God's glory, not only for your own rest, but for how is it? How is your you know, can your car be a ministry tool as you drive a friend to the doctor? You know, some of the things that we own, we're uniquely qualified to own them, you know, because of our abilities. So owning them cannot be wrong. If, you know, an artist is not wrong for owning a paintbrush, right?
Right.
I mean, that would be silly to say to artists, get rid of your paintbrush. Well, my ministry, my offering to God is to paint, you know, so I wouldn't give away my paintbrush. A guy who got very interested in St. Francis was originally part of kind of a folk rock group in the 60s. And, you know, I'm reading some of his book right now, and he talks about how he has a nice guitar. He says, I perform and I need a good instrument, you know, but you know, I know the rock stars who have, you know, 200 guitars, 300 guitars, you know, obviously they don't need that many. So the whole idea is, what do you need? One of the things that the Bodo will say in the book is an interesting word, which is, you know, called appropriation. You know, how much do you need to take out of the general system for yourself, and how much can you leave, you know, in? And there is some level of that, you know. It's a simple thing, but I think about that with tipping. You know, tipping's a really good way to help out people who are not always working for good wages. And if you say, you know, to be a more generous tipper, I always used to count, you know, exactly the amount. And say be a more generous tipper is kind of an easy way to, you know, give back, or to tip your lawn people. Or I used to like to try to grab my sanitation truck guys at Christmas time and give them some money, and to think, you know, I know that this will be greatly appreciated, and it's certainly not beyond me to do that. So So the attitude is one of, I think, being able to let go so that there's room, for God and room for others and room for ministry. And again, we look at Jesus. If he had not let go of his nature as God, then there would have been no ability for him to come and know our lives. So that is St. Francis for this week. And thank you all for coming. We'll look forward to getting together next week and continuing this series. And I'll make sure to send out reminders in case that was a problem for people. But I do know that people have lots on their plate, and some do watch this later. So blessings to them as well. Any other
Great,
last
thank you.
words?
Thank you, Andy.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Pastor Andy.
Thank you.
Brother.
Oh, boy.
All right, good night.